Hello everyone, another edition of the Auto Market. Today we're going to be talking a bit about the apparent worsening phenomena of discrimination taking place at financial institutions in Canada, with a particular emphasis on RBC, because RBC is the bank that I specifically observed with respect to the worsening patterns of discrimination. This particular video also is a call to action, which is inviting anybody out there that has experienced any form of discrimination with particular reference to the RBC, whether it's racial discrimination, discrimination against gender, indigenous communities, sexual orientation, any form of discrimination which you think you've experienced at the hands of an RBC. As an RBC client, we're inviting you to become part of a legal proceeding against RBC, because in our view, too many Canadians are suffering in silence as a result of institutions like RBC, which are very wealthy institutions that have become increasingly arrogant with respect to how they deal with various minority communities in Canada. We've seen that most recently with respect to Indigenous communities as it pertains to an AGM meeting. We're seeing the headlines more and more of institutions with a particular emphasis on RBC, which is engaged in a pattern of negligence. I know that in this particular incidences that I've been involved as a client of RBC for 30 years, it's just getting worse and worse. And in situations where one is a longstanding client of RBC, they know who you are, yet they see a visible minority that they in fact know who their name is, but they're demanding, identification, driver's license, and all kinds of identification like that, even though they know who they are. I mean, what is that? How many times do you see somebody at a bank who is not a minority who is being asked identification even though they call their name? This is the kind of activity which is being taken place at RBC, particularly three particular branches which I've observed these types of practices going on. One is this particular branch, which I'm showing the streetscape of at 99 Bank Street, another one at 90 Spark Street, and the other one in the Glebe. We are talking atrocious discrimination. We're talking about situations where, government checks are brought in, yet the client is put through a ringer of apparently calling the federal government to make sure it's not fraudulent, or activities where, a bank clearly says, you get a check from another bank that clearly has his name on it, that you take out from the envelope, and and RBC starts to allege that it must be a fraudulent check, because I guess apparently because it's being brought in by an invisible minority, it must be fraudulent. Apparently, client starts to get interrogated. Where do you get this check from? Eventually, they find out that the check was not fraudulent. Because it wasn't fraudulent, and it clearly was indications of not being fraudulent, and this particular client who brought in the check was a client of over 30 years and has had 0 cases of fraud. So why would a client with 0 cases of fraud all of a sudden after 30 years be bringing in fraudulent checks? This is what's been going on at RBC. Just atrocious behavior like this, just absolutely outrageous. How about this one? You bring in a certified check, it's clearly certified, the bank verifies that it's certified, but the bank refuses to cash it because apparently there might be some problems with it. Again, this is the type of experiences that was visible minority communities have. Even if check that is certified, that they can verify that it was certified, they then refuse to take the normal steps they would take to deposit a check. All kinds of these types of activities at RBC. In my view, people need to think twice. The RBC of old was an RBC that was about professionalism, about integrity, about responsibility. I don't know what's going on with RBC these days, but the type of racism that I've observed with this particular so-called venerated Canadian institutions has just become out of the sky craziness. Again, I'm seeing headlines. One particular headline was a couple of years ago where somebody, the RBC, called the cops on somebody. Another experience of a minority being harassed in the Quebec side, and it made headlines. And again, for every headline that you see in the Canadian news, rest assured there are numerous headlines not being documented because Canadian news is very oppressive to the coverage of racism that goes on in many Canadian institutions. So when you see one, you can rest assured there's probably, maybe 20, 30, 100 different cases like that, but they only choose to focus on one because we can't rely on our news to be very objective when it comes to these things. So they'll show one and then give the impression there's only one incident happening when there's numerous others that they refuse to cover. So, there's all kinds of discrimination happening. I saw another incident just in the Google reviews where somebody had this type of problem with a transaction, cashing a completely legal check. They refused to do so. Again, at this branch at 99 Bank Street. All kinds of problems like this. So, there is a legal proceeding now taking place against RBC. Anybody who has had experiences of this type of pattern of discrimination, we invite you to make your comments below, like and subscribe, or make your comments below if you want to potentially get more information about this proceeding, because we believe that if we can bring people together who have experienced these types of problems, we can break down the walls of isolation that the media in Canada has sought to enforce by not providing the full breadth of coverage of the type of racism which is going on at an institution like the RBC. It needs to be exposed to the experience of humiliation that communities are experiencing going to RBC and having these very public incidences of discrimination where, you go in, bank refuses to serve you, unless they provide all kinds of identification, even though you've gone there and for over 30 years at the bank, even though they in fact know your name, being harassed. And then there's the situation of retaliation, You go to the bank, you make a complaint, and all of a sudden they're putting notes on your file that's completely improper, and just completely bizarre stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, you make a complaint to the powers that be and they say, oh yeah, you're not supposed to be putting that discrimination. You're not supposed to be putting these type of notices on the client's file. And then RBC comes up with a recording of the conversation where their own employee admitted that it was improper conduct for the manager to be making these discriminatory notices against this particular client. And they produce a recording, and lo and behold, that part of the conversation is not even on there. I wonder how that happened. That's kind of interesting that RBC, as a part of its evidence, is, various parts of the recording that were part of the conversation happened to be not there. I wonder how that happened. So, again, RBC, as we're seeing in these types of in its activities, in its conduct, is not acting, in my humble opinion, in an ethical view and view of many other Canadians. So we need to hold them accountable. They are a chartered bank, they are a chartered institution, they are federally regulated, and we need to break down the walls of silence that minority are experiencing with respect to this institution, and that is the only way we are going to get these institutions acting responsibly, because the walls of discrimination they seek to divide, rule, and conquer this institution, and we need to bring Canadians together to hold them accountable. If you feel similarly, if you know of people who have experienced discrimination in the RBC, we invite you to make your comments below. We invite them to participate, get more information on what we're trying to do to hold RBC accountable for these types of improper, hold accountable for improper conduct, which violates the Canadian Human Rights Act. So again, thanks for watching this edition of the Ottawa Market. We invite you to like and subscribe, or to make your comments below if you would like to get more information about the legal proceeding against RBC, so that we can start to get redress on the type of ongoing pattern of humiliating discriminatory conduct that RBC is seeking to perpetrate. It's humiliating, it's degrading, it's dehumanizing. No Canadians should have to go to a bank expecting just to do an everyday transaction and be confronted with the kind of ignorance, bellicose behavior that is not only, again, being perpetrated by tellers at RBC, but by managers who are engaged in belligerent conduct as just absolutely shocking. The type of conduct that I've been seeing that's been taking place in the last couple of years at RBC, never have I seen it before in over 30 years, and now it seems to be commonplace. RBC needs to be held accountable. If you feel too that RBC needs to be held accountable, we invite you to make your comments below. Thanks for watching another edition of the Ottawa Market. I have a background in human rights and advocacy, and I look forward to any comments below so that we can hold institutions like RBC accountable for their perpetrating of humiliating, degrading conduct in Canadians that simply reflects the apparent prejudices that have been that are taking place, that are manifesting in the recent conduct of institutions like RBC in our Canadian financial institutional environment. RBC is an atrocious example of the type of conduct which is becoming more and more pervasive, and we need to stop this. Canada is a multicultural society. We are all equal. We're all God's children, so to speak, and this type of behavior is deplorable, objectionable, and if you feel or have observed anybody who you feel that has been subject to this type of discriminatory conduct, please make your comments below. I know that when I've observed this type of bad behavior, particularly this branch at 99 Bank Street, Canadians, or the people who were in the branch who observed it, were shocked. They were absolutely taken aback. They were vocal about it. They were supportive of the visible minority who is experiencing this type of humiliating conduct. That is, a very good thing to see. That shows you that Canadians are embrace our sense of equality, embrace our national identity as a multicultural society, as a cosmopolitan society. This is the views of the overwhelming majority of Canadians, and the type of reaction that people had in that branch to this absolutely horrific conduct being perpetrated by the management at this particular branch, in particular at the Bank and Queen. That deserves a condemnation. That deserves, definitely there were people there who were, in the branch who were very aware of what's going on because of the horrific behavior of RBC, and that's good to see in contrast with the absolutely outrageous conduct at this branch. So anybody who is choosing to deal with this branch at 99 Bank Street or 90 Spark Street, or the Glebe branch, hopefully you should be aware of the type of behavior you could experience at the branch that is apparently becoming more commonplace across RBC. And again, we invite you to like and subscribe, make your comments below if you want to get more information on a legal proceeding against RBC to redress the type of atrocious conduct which is taking place in the recent history of RBC. Thanks for watching.